Hey guys, welcome to my channel. You're watching Arc Builders CCMC, and today I'm doing a book review on Fired for Truth. This is a book written by Nate Wolfe, and it has a very catchy cover, very colorful cover, and it has Nate there, who means business in this picture. I really like this, and in the back you might not be able to see, but there is a council of church leadership there in the back. And here on the bottom, I don't know if you can see that, but there is a model of the firmament model of the earth, or the biblical model, as we have come to learn. And it's a little bit about what this is about. This is his story about, well, really what it leads up to a certain turning point in his ministry. He goes through a lot of different events in his life, starting as a child. And then he talks about his his college life and in the early marriage years. He goes into his ministry and maturity, new revelations. That's part 4. Ohio and Our Awakening to Truth. And then part 5 is called Truth Gets Serious. Part 6, Challenges and Creation. And then part 7 is the final sharing and exhortation. At the end, you're getting a cosmology Bible study at the end. So this is my first biography or autobiography that I have read in my entire life. I enjoyed it. I don't usually go for those types of books. I'm always looking for theology books. I have never read my entire life until I started reading about theology. And so this was kind of a step away from that. But I did enjoy it. At the time, I was going through some similar things in my life, so it was good to read somebody else. It's like, oh, good, you're suffering too. I feel better now. No. But kind of how people, they say that. Anyway, his story is very inspirational. And through his story, he's actually become a figure, like a pretty iconic figure for people who are coming to truth and who are getting connected to some of these communities outside of the mainstream Christian churches. His channel is a good channel to go to on YouTube. Matter of fact, I have his website ready to pull up just so I can show you guys. This is firedfortruth.org. And on his homepage, he says, in September of 2018, after attending a truth conference addressing biblical cosmology and other important topics, I was fired suddenly from my ministry of over 7 years. Shortly after, I began a new ministry to open as many eyes as I can to the true creation of the Almighty and expose the lies of Satan in the world. And over here he has you can go to YouTube, his Facebook, Patreon, and Twitter. And I don't know. I mean, I still think he gets Patreon supporters, but lately he's been saying, hey, if you're going to do Patreon, go over to this other guy's page. And now I don't have that other page handy, but I'm sure it's on his Facebook feed. So this is his website. You can order the book. Lulu. something changed. I don't have the updated where you can get his book. That's all I knew. I don't know if it's on Amazon or not. And here's his YouTube page. Oh, here's the other guy right here, this Truth Hunter Ministry. That's what I was talking about. Nate had recently said, I'm not looking for Patreon supporters, but if you do feel led, go to this guy, Truth Hunter Ministries, and he's doing a good thing. But here's Nate Wolfe's YouTube page. He's got a lot of videos, and he does lessons. He does live streams. Right now he's not doing them every Thursday night, but he was for a while. I don't know if that's something he's going to get back into. But Nate Wolfe is a good guy to. He's one of those really good, solid guys that he's dependable, and so it's like you get what you see with him, and the fruits of his ministry. Like you know people by their fruits, and for Nate Wolfe, his fruits really shine. So I think it was 2018 or October 2018 when I was scrolling through Facebook and I saw a live feed at a cosmology conference, some cosmology conference. It might have been the FEIC 2018 maybe, or something like that. But I was just asking around in the comments, and it happened to be his live stream. And so I connected with him, and from there I started seeing, he would post things about his channel, or he was going live, and I just developed a relationship with him. And I caught his live stream every Thursday night. I talked to him on the phone a few times, messaged him, and I was writing my manuscript for Crushing Conceptualism, and I thought, you know what, I'm writing right now about the behaviors of other people and the treatment that you might get when you start coming into truth, and about a lot of what he shares in Fired for Truth in his story. His is much more personal, coming from his situation, whereas the way I write is not so much like it doesn't so much focus on me personally. I do share stories, but this is his story right here. This is what happened to him, and the treatment that he faced when he began to question the tradition, or question what is commonly accepted. And so I want to read what I wrote about him in my book real quick, and then I want to share something that I really liked what I read in his book about that same about the same thing. I wrote in let's see, this chapter 1. During the autumn of 2018, I go through how I met him. When I began writing my manuscript, I became connected with a minister who was fired by the board of his church simply for looking into some of these issues. And in the footnotes, I put some of the topics that we're talking about here. Nate Wolfe, whose unfortunate experience is now his testimony, has turned the circumstances completely around. Excuse me, I'm a little dry this morning. Yet through his situation, God opened the door for Nate to begin a new ministry called Fired for Truth. I am reminded of the Apostle Paul, who was unable to see the church in Thessalonica when he intended on visiting them. And in quotations I have, but Satan hindered us. That's what Paul writes in the book of in Thessalonians. I can't remember, first or second. So in this situation, it seemed like everything was working against Paul because he wanted to visit Thessalonica and he couldn't. So he wrote him a letter. See how, in turn, God turned everything around. If Paul would have visited Thessalonica as he intended, then he would have never written that letter, and we wouldn't have the book of Thessalonians to read today. See how that works? See how God turns some things around? And it's the same way with Nate's ministry, because now he was ministering to a church before in his community, and now he's reaching literally thousands of people because of his ministry. And that's why this is a good story for people to understand, is to learn how God can turn those situations around. And his ministry has just blossomed since that unfortunate experience that he went through. And he can tell it so much better than me. I believe his testimony is on his channel somewhere. I know I've heard it a few times because he's been interviewed quite a few times, and I have listened to those interviews where he tells his story. And like I said, he tells it a lot better about some of the emotions that he was having and what he was thinking, the texts that he has. And I've received texts like that. I've never been fired from anywhere for looking into truth, but I could relate to him just because I began questioning a lot of different things that my church was teaching. I had received some texts, meet me in the office. We need to talk about this. The pastor would see something I posted on social media, or it'd get around to him that I was talking about this or that. And I remember one day it got really, like, you could feel the tension. Like, you could, how they say the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I have been in those situations in the office with the pastor on the account of doctrine. Okay, so, and the last email that I'd received from a pastor was that he said, "Andy, I've watched you chase after this, chase after that, run from one doctrine to the next, wavering in your faith, while I have stood firm. And now my church is growing larger and we are reaching the community." And to him, that was proof. And I'm sure Nate can understand this mentality coming from the ministers, that people often look at their success in the eyes of men, and they measure their success in the wrong way. They see that they are running. They're basically, people have good business ethics when they're operating a church, and a lot of times the system itself and how we can operate that system, we look at that, and if we're doing good, we measure our success by that instead of growing in truth. And that's why Nate was fired for truth, is because it did not line up with the word. I wanted to read something from the book. An important truth sidebar. And here he says, "Although for years I had been part of a religious group in which some felt they had arrived at the fullness of truth in the scriptures." Wow. I mean, already people think they have already found the truth and there's no need to search for anything further. I dealt with that a lot in the Oneness Pentecostal church, because they believe that their doctrine, I'm going to say it, they believe their private interpretation of the scriptures is the full arrival of where people need to be. They believe that their interpretation of scripture is where the bus stops. And that's where God is leading everyone else out of their denominations to the Oneness Pentecostal denomination, even though they're just another 501c3 organization who is no different than the rest. I would compare, never mind, I'm going to keep going. Okay, he says, although for years I had been a part of a religious group in which some felt they had arrived at fullness of truth in the scriptures, I always had the desire to be open to restudy and check my teaching and the church's teaching. After all, this was a very biblical approach to remaining in truth. And he might be referring to the Berean group when he's talking about that approach. In another place, he says, I had seen too many ministers fall victim to this. So many older ministers that I knew seemed to feel that after decades of study, they had arrived at all truth and did not need to continue in prayer, seeking, and study. They put the book back on the shelf and began replacing it with the flavor of the month. That's funny. But it's true. The religious bestsellers. I kind of like the memes of Joel Osteen's books. I saw one recently. It had like all of his book covers. They all had a picture of him, you know, and with some catchy, prosperous title. Anyway, it makes me laugh a little bit. But Nate Wolfe, Fired for Truth. I'm not sure how much this book is going for right now. I think $16, $18. He's an easy guy to get in touch with. He has his Facebook button on his channel. Okay. So, yeah, and it's an easy book to get through. It is. I read a chapter a night to my wife. We both enjoyed this book together, and his writing style is easy enough for anybody to be able to write, or to read. I'm sorry, and which is good. That is good. There's a lot of pictures in here too. So there's him and Robbie Davidson. Take on the World. There's a picture of him in his, later on in his ministry. That's his Fired for Truth studio. Remember a while back he had, when he started getting serious, he was doing some remodeling to make it, to get some better sound and equipment. There's his logo, Fired for Truth. Overall, this was a good read. Very encouraging book. My reviews are always so scattered. I never stay on topic or never stay talking about the book itself. But yes, this was good. He has pictures of, I don't know if this was prom. I think that might be prom. But a good family guy here. He's lived in Alaska. He's lived in like 5 different states at different times. He was a cop. I don't know if, I can't remember if cop's derogatory, so I'm sorry. He was a law enforcement officer is what he is. There it is. He's been a speaker at quite a few conferences since he has written this book. And Nate has actually, I'm going to keep going. He has actually opened the door to a lot for me. So even me coming into some of the different truther topics, Christian truther topics, like the cosmology. I was learning about the Nephilim, and around the same time, the cosmology and the Nephilim studies and the extra biblical texts, all those kind of came at the same time. Like I already knew about stuff like 9/11 and the FDA and all the pharma deception and things like that, and demons in the music and different things, and different things that the elites use to either control or manipulate the public. But this around 2017 is when I started coming into Nephilim and cosmology. So I was learning about that at the time. Funny thing is, the Nephilim actually goes back almost a decade in my research. I just never understood. It wasn't until I started learning about the Watchers that it all started making sense in the book of Enoch, and that was around 2017. But aside from all these topics, when Nate was here visiting, we did a cosmology meetup, and it was here in my hometown. He was coming into contact with a lot of people among the Torah community. All right, and I was too, and I've never had a problem with people who follow Torah. I know there are some people who are just totally against people that observe Torah. I've never been that way. It's not been, and part of the reason is because I've always had some kind of a conviction about holidays. I had always, at least for the past 7 years, I have felt uneasy about holidays. For the past 2.5, 3 years, I started developing somewhat of a conviction about my diet, and I got real serious about 2 years ago and changed some things about my diet, and it just happened to line up pretty well with Levitical law. Okay, so there were things, God was leading me in that direction. Now, when Nate was here, I had listened to him a little bit, and he went over a few things that he was learning about with his involvement or affiliation with these people from the Torah community. And he ended up doing a video. I watched his video before I watched the Identity Crisis video, and he talked about that sort of thing, or that kind of that the Ezekiel, and then the people of Israel and the Gentiles and things like that. He went into Ezekiel a little bit more than Jim Staley did, but he really got me to understand that it is a little more serious than people just following the Old Testament laws. Like I hadn't gone through the disputes with Paul and how people will use Paul's letters to fight against why we should obey the commands of God. I hadn't been through those. Since then I've resolved those disputes. They were quite easy to resolve when you understand where Paul was coming from, and that's why the foundation is very good when you are listening to the history of Israel and in the book of Kings and the prophets. Okay, so Nate actually opened the door for that for me. He told me, he said get April Ray's book, God's Love Language, and I did, and that was very instrumental as well. So I'm chasing rabbits again. I'm getting off topic, but Nate Wolfe, Fired for Truth. So a lot more came with this than just an autobiography about a guy who got fired. There's stories behind there, and a good purchase. If you have ever experienced any kind of scrutiny or from your church for looking into truth, even if you haven't, this is a good story this is a good testimony. That's what I'm going to call it. I don't want to call it a story. I want to call it a testimony. Fired for truth. Okay, now that I've been rambling for 25 minutes, I will wrap it up. I think I covered everything I wanted to talk about, but that is a very affordable book. It is easy to read, and that's good. I have had books where I cannot get through them because the vocabulary is just so choppy, and you have to really take everything slow and concentrate, and sometimes it hurts your brain. This actually just you can flow right through this, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Nate. Thank you for being very understandable. Okay, now I will wrap it up. This is Ark Builders CCMC book review.